Right, we were tracking that cold front coming through, and no doubt sparked off the storms, and they have led to issues. I mean, even still at this hour, we got a number that are without power there in New York State. Oh, almost 72,000 without power right now.
There were some strong winds. I saw wind gusts over 75 miles per hour in Maryland, like around Falling Water. There you go, Falling Waters, Maryland. We saw some strong winds, too, across New York State.
Yeah, so this is something that we're going to have to face yet again. Some of the same areas now. We talked about how the front was not just going to blast east and clear us. It's going to hang around. So today, once again, Mid-Atlantic coming to New England. Watch the skies for some potentially frisky thunderstorms.
And still hot before the storms get here. That's part of the ingredients for helping the storms to form. We're heading to the mid to upper 90s, D.C. 94, 95 in Richmond, Philly 93. So maybe not as hot as the past couple of days.
Shaving off maybe a couple of degrees. But overall, it's still going to be a very hot one. You can see the heat index value approaching 100 now in D.C. Philadelphia very close as well. But I tell you, it doesn't take too far to get to the relief. Across Pennsylvania, Philly, Pittsburgh, which one are you choosing?
I know, right? Well, I'm choosing Philly, but for many reasons. But I'm just saying, the front is making a big difference. It's just taking so long to get in here.
Yeah, exactly. So as it sticks around, you'll see this afternoon, the heating of the day, that really builds, that adds to the available energy for these thunderstorms. And there's your timestamp, put the radar into future mode. 4 or 5 o'clock, those thunderstorms get going. Northern Virginia, northern West Virginia, into western Maryland, central PA. You'll see those thunderstorms getting going and tracking on off towards the north and the east.
I think a lot of these could have those strong downburst winds like we've been seeing with the thunderstorms like we saw yesterday. There were about 250 or close to 300 storm reports, and most of them wind.
Yeah.
So wind is probably going to be the primary threat today, and maybe even still tomorrow.
Yeah, still dealing with the risk now. Mostly here as you get to New England here, parts of New Hampshire, Vermont, into Maine. Saturday, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can see showers and thunderstorms still impacting you there across New York State, and then back towards the south. NYC heading into your Sunday morning, maybe dealing with storms.
All right, so here's the front. And the reason why it's not going anywhere, there's just nothing to move it along. So it's pretty much a stationary, stalled front. The moisture kind of pulls into it. It was especially down through the Carolinas. We'll see that continue to hang out, which means we have some storm chances through the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't say put off plans and cancel things, but just know you may be ducking and dodging some storms and rainfall amounts here for us. I'd say the order of maybe 1 to 2. That could be fairly widespread. Locally, 2 to 3 inches, a possibility as well.
All right, that adds up. Now, parts of the East Coast will see a on-college game day forecast. So let's get to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where we do have some great weather. I mean, I think the most important part of this forecast is the dew points have dropped off a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So this is going to be nice. You know, you can get to these early September games. It can be brutal. Not there in Tuscaloosa, and a big game. This is going to be one of the bigger games of the season.
Or it could have been played in Texas, and that heat would have been unbearable. Yes. All right, let's take you to the Tigers hosting the Golden Lions here in Memphis. We've got, again, a nice looking forecast. I mean, this is good college football, tailgating and watching weather, don't you think?
We're lucking out. We are lucking out. How about there, North Carolina? Notre Dame. Chance of some storms.
A chance. A beautiful scene right now.
Yeah, that is nice. Wow. Well, speaking of beauty, but the danger, look at this hurricane that is working its way through the Atlantic. This is the visible satellite view here. So essentially, if you head up into space, look down, this is the view that you would have here of Hurricane Lee.
A lot of lightning near the center, near the eye. And also, I'm watching just the west side of this. It's a powerful hurricane, but it's not perfect because you see there's a little bit either dry air or shear or both affecting it on that west side right now. Yeah,
it's clear that over the last 12 hours or so, you've seen some changes from it being a little bit more perfect in nature to maybe a little eroded on that sort of western flank. But that does not mean this thing is not a very powerful storm and will not maintain that powerful strength through the next several days.
It'll go through some fluctuations. Eye-wall replacement cycle, probably most notably affecting its strength here, which we've been watching that actually I think happen as we speak. Hurricane Hunter's flying through, so we're getting real data. This is not estimates based on satellite comparison. This is real data about how strong it is. And they did find the pressure come up a bit with that last flight that just went through. So I think that'll probably mean a decrease in winds.
Yeah, not a whole lot, though. We're not expecting this thing to drop down to Category 1 by any stretch. But they're going to be busy, busy, busy. Here's a look at the Hurricane Hunters, the flight plan for the day. Another one going out for about 4:30, another one about 5:30. So they're going to be in and out of this thing trying to get as much information as they can because all this really helps with the computer models down the road.
Knowing more about what's happening with the hurricane right now makes a better forecast in the long run. So that's key. It's a Cat 5 at the moment, 165, pressure 926. Again, we'll see what happens with this next advisory that comes out at 11 o'clock, considering they are measuring some higher pressure, which usually correlates sometimes with some lower winds.
West-northwest at 14 miles per hour. You can see where it is in relation to the islands, and we continue to be grateful that this thing is going to be moving north of these islands here, of the Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands as well, because again, a very powerful system is moving in that direction to the northwest, but staying clear of landmass. Still a Cat 4, strong Cat 4 by the time we get into next week. Well, the Texas heat, that's been taunting enough this summer, but it hasn't loosened its grip just yet. Right now, excessive heat warnings are in place for a big chunk of the state. Yeah, let's check back in with our national correspondent, Justin Michaels, live there in Austin. And Justin, you've had a few of these assignments now this summer that you've had to deal with this heat. Are you getting a little bit tired of having to deal with the scorching numbers?
Hey, I'll tell you one thing. We get to come home, right? We have
roll at both spots, from how they were formed to the experiences you can have today.
Well, our guides to adventure on our year-long series are the Pattis brothers, Jim and Will, joining us once again. We always appreciate getting a chance to talk with you guys. So we want to start first, though, with how hurricanes can impact our trips to the parks. And we saw Hillary dump tons of rain on Death Valley, and now Acadia National Park could potentially see some high waves from Lee. Will, we'll start with you. How the flooding can change the look of Death Valley.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Well, who would have thought?
Change. I mean, you literally can't go right now. And Jim, we want to actually stay on that hurricane theme. When should we look at changing plans, maybe to avoid Lee's possible impact on Acadia? It's really the big waves at first we're worried about.
Yeah, Acadia National Park, obviously.
I'll continue to drive home is checking back for that forecast for sure as this thing tries to make that move towards the north in the coming days. Well, let's go to Rocky Mountain National Park, which is greatly influenced by moist air from the Pacific and some of that cold air coming down out of Canada. So, Will, what does all that combine to bring us?
Well, one thing.
And animals seem to love the Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. So, Jim, what brings people to this gem in the wilderness?
Yeah, I think when we talk about Alaska national parks in general, we're talking about superlatives. You know, we think
so much. Friends of the show, Jim and Will Pattis, the award-winning filmmakers. They can help you plan your park trip with their helpful guide at morethanjustparks.com.
Awesome. All these places, I tell you, gotta make it out there.
Yeah. All right, well, we are hitting the road, too, and today's one-tank getaway takes us to
the same, and that's the focus of today's Coffee Talk.
Yeah, so we want to talk about Lee and the track and impact along the coast, because many of you are wondering what kind of impact we're going to have. Let's just look, first of all, at what are the options right now based on the modeling where Lee could go. This is the European Ensemble forecast, and you've heard us talk about ensembles. It's taking the model run and tweaking the initial conditions, you know, maybe 50 times and seeing how that changes the outcome in the end. And quite a bit when you look at days 7 through 10.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, clearly near term, pretty good clustering close together with those lines, but spreads out. I think all in agreement that there's going to be that northward turn.
Yeah.
So that's confident there. But once you start to move your way up close towards Bermuda, there's a spread there. And so it becomes a little bit more dicey, and where could this thing actually end up?
And you remember from our discussion yesterday with Dr. Reg Postel that after day 8, you know, it's really not useful in the models to get that daily operational weather that will affect, you know, how what the actual track will be in terms of your specific weather here.
Absolutely. So this is a look at, again, the European ensembles looking at the different positions of where the low center may be. And this is looking at towards now Saturday the 16th. So not tomorrow, but the week after, and a very big spread on where the position of the low may be.
So a lot of uncertainty. And so then that made us think, okay, well, let's go back and just look at some impacts over the years. This is going back to 1950, and this is all of the Cat 5 hurricanes that have happened in the month of September. There were 17 of them. Not all of them, though, made landfall as a Cat 5. In fact, most of them did.
Most of them did not. Yeah. But no doubt about it, we certainly have felt the impacts from some of these systems, even though as they kind of came their way or made their way on in.
Had in recent years some major impacts from major hurricanes here, some as strong as Cat 4 or even Cat 5. They've all been on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
This is since 2017.
Yeah, and so of course, if we go back even further, there have been even more that have impacted us here along the Gulf Coast. Going back, I mean, you had 2018, Michael was a Category 5, Ida, 2021, Category 4. So The Gulf Coast has been the zone of the major hurricane landfalls.
So we decided to take the Gulf Coast and Florida out of the mix and just go back to the year 2000 and see what were the major hurricanes that have impacted us here. There wasn't a landfall.
Yeah.
You know, with the exception of Florida. Go north of there, no major landfall since 2000.
Which is one of those shocking stats. Like, it's just been a very, very long time since we had a major hurricane make landfall on the east coast of Florida, east coast of the U.S. outside of Florida. Last time was actually
Fran in 96.
Yeah.
But there have been impacts. I mean, just go back to Dorian with the Outer Banks. You know, of course, the Bahamas got the main impact from Dorian when it was strongest here, but it weakened by the time it moved up to the Outer Banks, and we can show you what it looked like with some of the overwash and the big waves moving on the pier there in the Outer Banks due to Hurricane Dorian. Also Florence.
Yeah, remember that? That came on in and just dumped all kinds of rain. So it wasn't the most powerful when it came in. But it had a huge impact with the flooding there in the Carolinas. That was back in 2018.
State records.
Yeah.
And it was a Cat 5 at one point in its life. It just, by the time it made it to land, it had weakened. So in terms of impacts here, we really don't know in terms of wind or rain yet, especially when you talk about New England.
Right.
But we do know the waves. And so that's, I would think, a guarantee. And we look at the wave impact that we're going to see from the islands all the way up along the coast here. That's coming next week and will continue into next weekend.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we can say. For certainty, there will be wave action there right along the coast of the U.S.
All right. Well, our question of the day is about hurricanes in your memory.
Meteorologists can point to a storm, whether it's a hurricane, a winter storm, whatever it may be, that really drove them to becoming a meteorologist.
Yeah, no, it's common. Friday off right. We're glad you're here and choosing America's Morning Headquarters to get you through the mid-morning hours.
Weather Channel here to help you plan for the big events that are ahead, heading in towards the weekend. Of course, the weather out there, with the concern being Hurricane Lee, going from a tropical storm to a Category 5 in almost 24 hours. I mean, rapid intensification. That's even beyond rapid. It's like if there was another word for it, we'd have to make it up, because this thing really tightened up very quickly.
Was it a record for rapid intensification? I think that's Wilma, which was a smidge more than this, but this is right up there with that. So we've got more on Lee. I mean, it's so dramatic when you look at it on satellite. We're going to talk about where it is right now and where it's headed in intensity. We also have to talk about the intense heat that we have out there that's still parked over the southern plains and raising concerns over the power supply in Texas. And so we've got our national correspondent, Justin Michaels, live in Austin with the latest on that.
Yeah, and of course, we're also putting 2 more stamps in our passport to the parks. That's at 40 past the hour. Joined by the Pattis brothers to get the inside scoop on Rocky Mountain and Glacier Bay National Parks.
It may be the end of the work week, but today's big deal is just getting started.
Even though we're not talking about the direct impacts to some of these islands, indirectly, there's going to be some issues.
Yeah, and we always say the impacts will go outside of the cone, and even if it goes to the center or right side of the cone, there's still going to be impacts to the islands and potentially the lower 48. So I want to talk about all of that. We'll start with the hurricane force winds that could impact the islands. And so this is a forecast with the probability of those hurricane force winds over the next 5 days. And look, in this business, you almost never say there's a 0% chance of something happening, but the chance is nearly zero. It's very far north in terms of that probability of hurricane force winds for the islands, all down here, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands here. So it's not hurricane force winds that we're concerned about. Possibly tropical storm. I mean, let's take a look at that next. That's where we do have that risk over the next several days. It's closer. Here we go. We've got Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands right in here. It's closer, but still not right overhead. So I would say the main impacts are going to be the waves that we will see in the islands, especially on the northern and eastern side of all of the islands here, not just, of course, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but talking about Anguilla and St. Martin. Even St. Bart's might see it. And, of course, Barbados sticks out right there. Now, what's steering us is this big high pressure that's over the Atlantic. This high pressure is blocking up everything. So it's going to be steering the hurricane around it, but at the same time, it's blocking this trough from really making significant progress east here, which this would help pick it up. So I think what we're going to have to do is probably wait for the next trough to come in to really help pick it up and turn it. And you see that in the forecasted path here. So we've got this over the next several days, and then that turn to the north and all the different iterations that could happen. And you can see that based on the European ensemble tracks, once we get into that 7 to 10 day time frame, there's so much spread in where the ensembles think that it may possibly go based on the initial conditions. And this will change considerably, I think, as we just get on in time and get more data, get closer in time. Time makes a big difference in forecast processes. Now, here we go with the forecast for where that low could be that's associated with the hurricane all over the place by next Saturday. This is next Saturday, so we're talking now 8 days away, and so we definitely have time to worry about that specific track. The waves are going to happen before that, and so the waves starting over the weekend across the islands. By next week, we're talking about the waves and the swell ramping up here over the Atlantic, affecting us over nearly the entire eastern seaboard, and this will be the case into next weekend. So planning ahead for that to be a primary or I would say a necessary sort of plan that you need to make here in terms of impacts from Lee. Now, let's go more into what's happening closer to home right now, which is the heat, Alex.
Yeah, it is.
The Texas heat has been taunting enough this summer, and it hasn't loosened its grip just yet. Right now, excessive heat warnings are in place for a chunk of the state. So let's check in with national correspondent Justin Michaels, who is live in Austin. Justin, Alex had mentioned earlier how many of these heat waves you've covered this summer. Do you have any tricks for getting through them, especially as things really heat up later in the afternoon?
I'll tell you one thing, obviously.
Tuesday forecast is key. That's when we see the front come in.
Yeah, Jen, and to your point, I'm looking here. Could it be next Friday? I mean, again, we've got days to go before this could actually verify. Next Friday and Saturday, 92 and 91 respectively. That's going to feel like winter.
Yeah. Cold snap on the way.
Yes.
Justin, thanks so much. Try to stay cool out there. I know even as the early part of the day there in Texas, it's still pretty hot at this early portion of the day.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look at what's coming up today.
But you're not forgetting those storms.
So we're going to talk more actually about hurricanes and landfalls and give you some perspective on major hurricanes. That's coming up in the show. But we want to hear your comments and stories. You can go to X or now Threads as well to share your comments, even pictures, and we will share them on the show. The fact that we've had storms brought you a little relief from time to time from that, but also brought some power outages.
Yeah, not what you want, particularly when you're still hot, right? These folks are without power here. We've got a good, almost 66,000 there without power in New York State, Virginia, up to almost 40,000. So no AC in these areas that we could certainly use it right now with it being so very hot.
Yeah, those storms here pretty potent yesterday. Winds actually gusted to 75 miles per hour, downburst out of a storm in Falling Waters, Maryland. We saw winds gusting over 60 in multiple spots in New York State as well.
And we unfortunately could be facing that threat yet again for today. The threat for severe weather in place, some of the same locations here for us. We talked about the front coming through and not just blasting on by. Yeah, it's hanging out. So with it being stuck in place, could set off more storms, and some of those could pack a punch with damaging winds and hail, the primary risks.
And, because the front's not coming through, our temperatures are really going to be warm out ahead of it. This warmth is part of the ingredients that help fuel these thunderstorms. So warming to the mid-90s again today. Not quite record-breaking, but we're up there.
Yeah, certainly up there. And you see the heat index values approaching 100 there in parts of the mid-Atlantic. So that's going to add fuel for these thunderstorms, right? Heating of the day, things really heating up. Energy for these thunderstorms, that'll be plentiful. And as we get into the afternoon, look at how these thunderstorms do flare and blossom. Watch out later through this afternoon, through the evening, big storms. Well, we are saying goodbye to summer, but there's still right now, and certainly in the near term, direct impacts to land, missing those land masses there. But we'll have to watch it again in those waters. Thanks to this beast. Look at the visible satellite here for us, so you can see the big cloud shield, but also put the lightning on. And those lightning strikes have been a bit on the increase here, I'd say, over the last hour or two, right there where the center of the circulation is.
Yeah, no, that's a sign you often get out of storms that are rapidly intensifying, which, of course, we saw that go through yesterday. There's one factor I'm watching, maybe that will limit us a little bit at the moment, is that it's either sheer or dry air, or maybe it's both here on the western side, because it's not perfectly symmetrical all around.
Yeah, you can see if you kind of compare that eastern half of it compared to that western half, it's a little bit more ragged in appearance there on the western edge.
Yeah, one of the limits usually at this point in a hurricane's life is when it goes through an eyewall replacement cycle, and that might limit the intensity for a time, but then it replaces itself with the eye wall, and then it can re-intensify and get larger too. And so that's something we'll be watching. New advisories coming out soon, within a half hour. So the last one was 165. Hurricane hunters did find a pressure that was much higher than this 926 from the last advisory. So we'll see what happens with the next one.
We will see. I think no question this will still be a major hurricane.
Oh yeah. No, and we expect fluctuations.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything going as according to plan here in the forecast. Moving north and west, may strengthen a bit more heading into tomorrow morning, maybe up to 175. And even as you see heading through the weekend, some of those wind speeds come down. I mean, this is still a Category 4 hurricane as we head through the end of the weekend into the early part of next week. But mostly everything keeping it north of land.
Yeah, so for now, this high pressure is the main steering feature that we're watching in the Atlantic Ocean. So that holds in place. It's not budging, and it's kind of blocking up everything from really moving along.
That's right. So it'll continue to move on the periphery of that high and then make a turn towards the north. Now, where did that turn happen? Looks like it'll be well east of the East Coast, but then down the road, that's where things get a little bit more dicey in terms of where this thing may end up here in the next 10 days.
There's so much uncertainty. And as you heard yesterday, we were talking with Dr. Reg Postel about once you get past day 8, it's hard to really put a lot of stock in, exactly the exact details of the models. General trends, yes, but details are tough. So this is something you want to keep tuning back in for, have patience with this forecast, and keep watching for changes to the forecast.
Absolutely.
Well, the Texas heat has been taunting enough this summer, and it hasn't loosened its grip just yet. Right now, excessive heat warnings are in place for a chunk of the state.
Well, we want to check in now with our national correspondent, Justin Michaels, live there in Austin. And Justin, certainly a place that is no stranger to dealing with heat, but we're kind of getting to the point of like, okay, this is a bit much.
It really is. And in fact, today, once we breach the century mark here in Austin, we'll be on day 6.
Roll at both spots, from how they were formed to the experiences you can have today.
Well, our guides to adventure on our year-long series are the Pattis brothers, Jim and Will, joining us once again. We always appreciate getting a chance to talk with you guys. So we want to start first, though, with how hurricanes can impact our trips to the parks. And we saw Hillary dump tons of rain on Death Valley, and now Acadia National Park could potentially see some high waves from Lee. Will, we'll start with you. How the flooding can change the look of Death Valley.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Well, who would have thought?
Change. I mean, you literally can't go right now. And Jim, we want to actually stay on that hurricane theme. When should we look at changing plans, maybe to avoid Lee's possible impact on Acadia? It's really the big waves at first we're worried about.
Yeah, Acadia National Park, obviously.
I'll continue to drive home is checking back for that forecast for sure as this thing tries to make that move towards the north in the coming days. Well, let's go to Rocky Mountain National Park, which is greatly influenced by moist air from the Pacific and some of that cold air coming down out of Canada. So, Will, what does all that combine to bring us?
Well, one thing.
And animals seem to love the Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. So, Jim, what brings people to this gem in the wilderness?
Yeah, I think when we talk about Alaska national parks in general, we're talking about superlatives. We think
so much. Friends of the show, Jim and Will Pattis, the award-winning filmmakers. They can help you plan your park trip with their helpful guide at morethanjustparks.com.
Awesome. All these places, I tell you, majors are made the same. And that's the focus of today's Coffee Talk.
Okay, so we'll get into this, talking about major hurricanes and impacts on the U.S. But first, just looking at Lee and the projected path using the ensemble models. This is a European model run in ensemble form, which means you take the initial conditions, you tweak them 50 times, and then you see what the outcome is. And in the longer range, you can see there's quite a range of outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. Short term, very well clustered, so that's when you have a little bit more confidence. But look, down the road, we get to that day 8, 9, 10. I mean, you got one that takes it into Long Island, while others take it well out to sea. So you start to say, okay, we don't know what's going to happen down the road, at least just yet.
No, we're very transparent about that. And that's just track. Nothing to be said for intensity, right? This is another way to look at it. This is the Tuesday forecast for the location of the low pressure at the center of the hurricane. And you can see, by the time you get to next Saturday, it's all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. So just to show you that, yes, near term, good confidence. Long term, not quite so much your force for sure when it comes to Lee. Now, when we talk about what's been going on in September with major hurricanes, going back to 1950, we've seen a few of them. In fact, 17 Category 5 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin.
They didn't all make landfall as a Cat 5 or even as a major. So this really got us thinking about, let's look at majors that have made landfall and kind of restrict into recent years. So first of all, just recently in the Gulf of Mexico, we've had a lot of activity. I mean, you go back to 2017, we had 8 major landfalls, and most of them 4s or 5s.
Amazing, amazing. And, you know, if we were to go back to 2005, remember that was a banner year with, of course, Katrina.
Right.
It's just a slew of major hurricanes that made landfall in the Gulf of Mexico.
So we take out the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
We take out Florida as well. And we just wanted to look at the rest of the East Coast, since Lee is more of a focus farther north.
Yes.
And we searched for major hurricanes going back to the year 2000. And
it was tough.
There's no landfalls.
No landfalls at all.
Yeah.
Now, these made to major status, but in terms of making landfall, when they either made that landfall, had weakened at that point, or they didn't make landfall at all.
Yeah. I mean,
but they still were impactful.
They were impactful, and so these were newsworthy. And let's go back to Dorian. I mean, Dorian, of course, over the Bahamas here, just absolutely
Our turn to the north.
Yeah, a lot of impacts. And, you know, you think about Florence. Again, Florence was a Category 5 at one point in its life, but not when it made land. We are going to be watching the waves as an impact here, and this is pretty much a guarantee, regardless of what track it takes.
So at the very least, expect issues along the entire East Coast when it comes to being in the waters.
And waves can be damaging, too.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going back to our question of the day. We're asking you.
Yep.
Don't waste that gas. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a hurricane on our hands. We've got to talk about. Thank you for choosing America's Morning Headquarters to get you through the mid-morning hours.
That's right. The Weather Channel here with you to help you plan out for the big events ahead. And, of course, the big thing that's on a lot of folks' mind is what's going on with Hurricane Lee. As you can see behind us, that thing rapidly intensified, going from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane in just about 24 hours.
Yes, and you know, the amount of intensity that it gained here put it into elite territory. We're going to share more with you on that coming up here. But the new advisory is in as well. So we've got that coming up too, the latest on the intensity, the track, and the forecast for intensity.
Yes, speaking of intensity, how about the intense heat that is parked there over the southern plains, really raising concerns over the power supply in Texas. We have our national correspondent Justin Michaels there live in Austin with the very latest.
And we're putting 2 more stamps in our passport to the parks at 40 past the hour. We're joined by the Padditz brothers to get the inside scoop on Rocky Mountain National Park and Glacier Bay National Park. Well, it may be the end of the work week, but today's big deal is just...
Indirectly, we're certainly feeling it now for some of the islands, and the East Coast will feel that as well.
For sure. I mean, there is some guarantee with that, and we'll talk about that. The islands, I follow a couple of blogs, one in particular from weather enthusiasts in the islands, and I think they're finally breathing the sigh of relief that this is going to track north here. But it's hard to ever write it off, right?
When you see this thing getting that close, you kind of hold your breath a bit.
Yeah, but I think a turn to the south at this point here is unlikely. So we'll look at that. I want to talk about the impacts to the islands, and in particular the northern islands. You're talking over from the West Indies. We're talking about St. Martin and Anguilla, and then over to the British Virgin Islands. You know, for us, hurricane force winds, you can see the probability. I hate to ever say 0, but you look at that chance, even of 0 to 10%. It's well to the north of the island. So we've got all that space in between there. So not concerned about hurricane force winds. And really, when it even comes to tropical storm force winds here, that's not even that close. It's the waves that are going to be the biggest concern, mainly on the northern side of the islands, and watching all of them right here. Puerto Rico, north side of beaches, be ready for some big waves. Now, we look at the forecast. This high pressure has been the main player in the steering flow, and the western edge of this big ridge may not be that strong by the time this gets up here, so it's just going to slow things down, and that's, you know, really why everything's taking so long. The high pressure itself has been very, in terms of everything, very slow to allow things to move. It's been blocking everything up in our atmosphere. So you notice that we've got a long time to deal with this. This is the next 10 days that we are going to be watching the track of Lee. This is the ensemble forecast for the European model, taking the model and then tweaking the initial conditions about 50 different times and seeing how it plays out in the end. And you notice once we get beyond about 7 or 8 days, there's a lot of spread in that potential forecast here. Certainly you could probably get your eye onto what would be the most likely track, but at this point we truly don't know what will happen in that time frame. So it's important to watch each iteration of the forecast. We'll keep it going here on the Weather Channel. There's a lot of different potential placements of where it may be, especially getting into that longer range. And of course, what's happening now affects us in the longer range. The other weather features in the atmosphere affect us in the longer range. So the one thing that we can really say with more certainty is the waves will be up, and that will be the case getting in through the weekend for the islands, getting into next week along the eastern seaboard. The swell, the rip current risk here, and maybe even some bigger waves, that's coming in, a guarantee regardless of the track, and we'll see that by the time we get into next weekend into the north and east. Then we go over back into the lower 48 and talking more about the heat that is just relentless this year. Texas heat has been stalking plans all summer, and it doesn't look to loosen its grip too much as we enter fall. Let's check in with national correspondent Justin Michaels, who is live in Austin. Justin, have you noticed maybe sort of cutting down on people who are out and about there in town because of the heat?
Well, what we did yesterday, Jen, was notice a huge drop-off of folks who were out exercising themselves, maybe walking their dogs as well. This morning, up that temperature in your home a little bit up to the upper 70s. Unplug appliances, don't use your oven, things to stay cool and also to protect the grid. Jen, Alex, and to you.
It's been a long summer of doing this, though, Justin. Thank you for that update. Yeah, we have another threat to your beach plans that's set to arrive before the waves.
The folks there in South Florida, it's one of those you just won't ever forget.
Yeah.
Won't ever forget. Well, head to X, formerly known as Twitter. Also now on Threads. You can send us your comments. You have pictures as well. We'd love to see that too. Share them with us. Use the hashtag.
Possible again, and they left their mark. A lot of folks without power this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear where the storms were, right? Where the power outages are. You see kind of a few there in Virginia, and then quite a few eastern PA, Jersey, into eastern New York. In fact, New York right now, over 60,000 customers without power.
Especially up around the Capital District. That's where we just had so many storms dropping some really strong winds.
Yeah.
Winds gusted easily over 60 miles per hour, downbursts out of the storms. You see the reports there. Also, falling waters, Maryland. We had a wind gust of 75 miles per hour.
Ooh, yeah, Category 1 hurricane force there.
I know.
Pretty amazing.
Thunderstorm.
Out of a storm. And so, again, we need to keep an eye on these areas from the mid-Atlantic north and eastbound into New England for the day. Anywhere you see the red, the risk is there for damaging wind gusts, maybe some hail as well. Those will be the primary risks that we face with this front coming through. Well, trying to come through, but it's having a tough time.
It's not really coming through. It's really stationary, hanging out right here just to the west of the I-95. So we still stay hot and humid today. Not as hot as yesterday. We're not breaking records like we were, but 88 in Boston with higher dew points, really uncomfortable.
Very much so, no doubt about it. So be prepared for that. Heat index values reaching nearly 100 there for you in D.C. I mean, what's the difference here? Philly to Pittsburgh going across the state of Pennsylvania. Yeah, it's a much different story.
Yeah, no, it's not just about the feels like or the temperature. It's the feels like. It's the dew point. And so you're behind the front in Pittsburgh. Now, the front itself is going to be the trigger for some showers and storms. Most of the instability that you see in the hot pink, that'll be tied into where we have all that heat and the higher dew points.
So you'll see that building throughout the day, and those thunderstorms building as well, 4 or 5 o'clock. Parts of West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, you see more of those thunderstorms. Very similar sort of trajectory as the storms that we saw that developed yesterday. And some of those damaging wind gusts going to be one of those primary risks that we do have to contend with. And then tomorrow, Jen, another day with more storms.
Yeah, we're not through. The front just can't make any progress completely east. So chance of storms tomorrow. We'll keep an eye on Portland, up there in Maine, and some of those storms also could bring some gusty winds.
And so, of course, some of those college football games, maybe some impacts from the weather.
Yes.
Well, so I'll tell you, parts of
weather in play here with the forecast starting off with Alabama hosting Texas. Big game, Alex. You say it's the biggest this weekend?
Oh, yeah, by far. This is the one. It's probably one of the bigger ones of the year. Top 5 of the year for sure. Hopefully it lives up to its billing. We shall see. Last year was a fun one. Now, Alabama's at home. We'll see if Texas can do it. I know Paul Goodlow's rooting for the Longhorns.
But we're just glad it's not in Texas because it would be so hot.
Yes.
I mean, fans, neither team really wants to play in the kind of heat we got going on in Texas. All right, let's go to Miami hosting Texas A&M. It's going to be warm and humid, you know, kind of typical South Florida. Yeah.
But it looks like we'll avoid a whole lot of rain and thunderstorm activity. How about we head to the Bronx? The Yankees and the Brewers going at it. This is tomorrow afternoon. And, yeah, as we work our way through all the innings, we've got that risk for some showers and thunderstorms.
Not as hot. maybe not as likely to be severe, but
The
still
talk
could be
may
lightning.
have to come out.
In at the top of the hour, and it is a Category 4 with winds of 155 miles per hour.
So if you compare it to the previous advisory, it's slightly weaker, but still very, very powerful hurricane here churning through the Atlantic. There's the visible satellite view showing you this big mass here. Now, you notice here how when you kind of compare the eastern half to the western half, look a bit different. That western half is looking a little bit more ragged in nature.
The wind shear, maybe some dry air as well, has been affecting us on the western side. And just one thing I've been noticing with the eye itself, yesterday when it went through that transformation, that rapid intensification, it had a very circular eye wall. And I've seen some changes through the morning. It was elliptical at one point. So it's not as circular. In fact, that showed up in that one image. Let's see if we get it right in there. See how it kind of like flattened out a little bit. So most of the strongest of the hurricanes will have that like concentric.
Exactly. So it's certainly dealing with some fluctuations in terms of the intensity of this thing. It is expected to stay pretty strong though, and the winds.
The shear. So we put the shear on the map here, Megan. Thank you for this here, so we can show you it's all on the western side that's affecting it. 155 is still strong,
Absolutely.
And so, but that's what's limiting its strength right now.
Some of the drier air hanging off just towards the west as well. Maybe some of that is getting entrained as well. But for the most part, again, this is still a very formidable and powerful Category 4 hurricane. Looking like it's going to continue to move towards the west-northwest, bypassing the northern Leeward Islands, heading over towards places like the Rios Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. That's the best news that we can give you here, is this powerful system will miss those islands in terms of direct impact.
Another thing these storms, these hurricanes do, especially at this strength, is they go through the eye wall replacement cycles, and usually every time that happens, they grow a little larger in size. So we still worry about the wingspan and maybe getting into some tropical storm force winds, especially in the northern islands.
So here's the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Northwestward motion here, and you notice the wind speeds, even though they may come down a bit here as we work our way through time, still very strong hurricane here for you, but the general motion to the northwest, and then we start to see that turn towards the north a bit for next week.
Yeah, and most certainly will be a big wave generator. Let's go back to the Texas heat. It has been taunting enough this summer, and it hasn't loosened its grip just yet. Right now, excessive heat warnings are in place for a chunk of the state.
Yeah, we want to check back in with our national correspondent, Justin Michaels, live there in Austin. And Justin, it's been a summer of just sizzling times now. Can you really even get used to this kind of heat? Are you seeing people getting out and exercising, jogging in the morning hours to try to stay fit in this heat?
I think they're doing it as early in the day as possible. Yesterday afternoon, while we were live on Weather Underground, we saw the number of people out drop dramatically. In fact, we would go for 10, 15, 20 minutes without seeing one person walking by. So people are taking care of themselves.
It's a big role at both spots, from how they were formed to the experiences you can have today.
Well, our guides to adventure on our year-long series are the Pattis brothers, Jim and Will, joining us once again. We always appreciate getting a chance to talk with you guys. So we want to start first, though, with how hurricanes can impact our trips to the parks. And we saw Hillary dump tons of rain on Death Valley, and now Acadia National Park could potentially see some high waves from Lee. Will, we'll start with you. How the flooding can change the look of Death Valley?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Well, who would have thought?
A lot of change. I mean, you literally can't go right now. And Jim, we want to actually stay on that hurricane theme. When should we look at changing plans, maybe to avoid Lee's possible impact on Acadia? So it's really the big waves that first we're worried about.
Yeah, Acadia National Park.
We're all continuing to drive home is checking back for that forecast for sure as this thing tries to make that move towards the north in the coming days. Well, let's go to Rocky Mountain National Park, which is greatly influenced by moist air from the Pacific and some of that cold air coming down out of Canada. So, Will, what does all that combine to bring us?
Well,
and animals seem to love the Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. So, Jim, what brings people to this gem in the wilderness?
Yeah, I think when we talk about Alaska national parks in general, we're talking about superlatives.
Thank you so much. Friends of the show, Jim and Will Pattis, the award-winning filmmakers. They can help you plan your park trip with their helpful guide at morethanjustparks.com.
Awesome. All these places, I tell you, got to make it out there.
Yeah. All right, well, we are hitting the road, too, and today's one-tank getaway takes us to...
Measures are made the same, and that's the focus of today's Coffee Talk.
Okay, so we'll get into this talking about major hurricanes and impacts on the U.S., but first, just looking at Lee and the projected path using the ensemble models. This is a European model run in ensemble form, which means you take the initial conditions, you tweak them about 50 times, and then you see what the outcome is. And in the longer range, you can see there's quite a range of outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. Short term, very well clustered, so that's when you have a little bit more confidence. But look, down the road, we get to that day 8, 9, 10. I mean, you got one that takes it into Long Island, while others take it well out to sea. So you start to say, okay, we don't know what's going to happen down the road, at least just yet.
No, we're very transparent about that. And that's just track. Nothing to be said for intensity, right? This is another way to look at it. This is the Tuesday forecast for the location of the low pressure at the center of the hurricane. And you can see, by the time you get to next Saturday, it's all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. So just to show you that, yes, near term, good confidence. Long term, not quite so much your force, for sure, when it comes to Lee. Now, when we talk about what's been going on in September with major hurricanes, going back to 1950, we've seen a few of them. In fact, 17 Category 5 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin.
They didn't all make landfall as a Cat 5 or even as a major. So this really got us thinking about, let's look at majors that have made landfall and kind of restricted to recent. First of all, just recently in the Gulf of Mexico, we've had a lot of activity. I mean, you go back to 2017, we had 8 major landfalls, and most of them 4s or 5s.
Amazing, amazing. And, if we were to go back to 2005, remember that was a banner year with, of course, Katrina.
Right.
It's just a slew of major hurricanes that made landfall in the Gulf of Mexico.
So we take out the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
We take out Florida as well. And we just wanted to look at the rest of the East Coast, since Lee is more of a focus farther north.
Yes.
And we searched for major hurricanes going back to the year 2000. And
it was tough.
There's no landfalls.
No landfalls at all. Now, these made to major status, but in terms of making landfall, when they either made that landfall, they had weakened at that point, or they didn't make landfall at all.
Yeah. I mean,
but they still were impactful.
They were impactful, and so these were newsworthy. And let's go back to Dorian. I mean, Dorian, of course, over the Bahamas here, just absolutely devastating.
Our turn to the north.
Yeah, a lot of impacts. And you think about Florence. Again, Florence was a Category 5 at one point in its life, but not when it made landfall. We are going to be watching the waves as an impact here, and this is pretty much a guarantee, regardless of what track.
Yeah, so at the very least, expect issues along the entire East Coast when it comes to being in the waters.
And waves can be damaging, too.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going back to our question of the day. We're asking you,